Elena heard the first explosion just as she was putting little Maria down for her afternoon nap. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder, but the sky was clear and blue above their small village in northern Italy. She paused, her hand still smoothing the baby's blanket, listening. Another boom echoed off the mountains. Closer this time, her neighbor Rosa burst through the door without knocking, her face pale with terror. "They're coming up the valley road," she gasped. "The Germans. Father Antonio saw their trucks from the church tower. We have maybe an hour before they reach us." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had heard the stories from other villages. The soldiers would search every house, looking for partisans, for weapons, for any sign of resistance. Young men would be taken away. Sometimes they never came back. "Giuseppe," she whispered, thinking of her husband. He had been conscripted into the Italian army 6 months ago. His last letter had come from somewhere near Naples, but that was weeks ago. She had no idea if he was alive or dead, safe or in danger. Maria stirred in her crib, making soft baby sounds. Elena picked her up, feeling the warm weight of her daughter against her chest. The baby was only 4 months old, still so small and fragile. How could she protect her from what was coming? Rosa grabbed Elena's arm. "We're leaving now. Take only what you can carry and meet us at the old mill road in 20 minutes. The Benedetti family is coming too, and old Marco from the bakery. We're going to try to reach the border." The border. Switzerland was only 30 miles away through the mountains, but it might as well have been on the moon. Elena had never been more than 5 miles from her village in her entire life. She didn't know the mountain paths, didn't know how to survive in the wilderness with a baby, but staying meant certain danger. The Germans had been moving through the region for weeks, and each village they passed through was left changed forever. Men disappeared, food was taken. Fear settled like a dark cloud over everything. Elena moved quickly through her small house, grabbing what she could. A few changes of clothes for herself and Maria, the baby's blanket that her mother had knitted, a small bag of flour, some cheese wrapped in cloth, the little money she had hidden in a jar behind the kitchen stove. She strapped Maria to her chest with a long shawl, the way mountain women had carried their babies for generations. The baby looked up at her with dark, trusting eyes, not understanding that their world was about to change forever. At the mill road, Elena found 12 other people waiting. She knew them all by name, had grown up with most of them. There was the Benedetti family with their twin boys, maybe 6 years old, Rosa and her elderly mother, who walked with a cane, Marco the baker, his hands still dusty with flour, 2 other women with small children, a teenage boy whose parents had already been taken away. They looked at each other with frightened eyes, none of them really knowing what to do. They were farmers and bakers and mothers, not soldiers or adventurers, but they had no choice. "We follow the river valley north," said Marco, who had once been a shepherd before he took over the bakery. "It's the longest way, but it keeps us away from the main roads. If we're lucky, we can reach the high pastures by tomorrow night." They started walking just as the sun began to set. Behind them, smoke was rising from their village. Elena didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see her home burning. The first night was the hardest. They had found shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut, but it was cold and damp. Maria cried often, and Elena worried that the sound would give them away. The other mothers shared what little food they had, and Rosa's mother told stories to keep. The children calmed. Elena lay awake listening to the sounds of the night. Every snapping twig, every distant sound made her heart race. Were those footsteps? Were soldiers tracking them? She held Maria closer, whispering prayers she had learned. As a child. By the second day, they had climbed higher into the mountains. The path was rough and steep, and Elena's legs ached from carrying the baby. One of the Benedetti twins had twisted his ankle, and they had to stop often to rest. Food was running low, and they were drinking water from mountain streams that tasted of stone and snow. They met other refugees on the 3rd day. A family from a village to the east had been walking for a week. They shared news that made everyone's heart sink. The Germans were moving faster than expected, and many of the usual crossing points into Switzerland were being watched. "There's a pass further north," said the father of the other family. "It's harder to reach, but the Swiss guards there are more likely to let refugees through. We just have to be careful of the patrols." Elena learned to sleep sitting up with Maria in her arms. She learned to walk for hours without complaining, even when her feet were bleeding from her worn shoes. She learned to eat very little and give most of her food to her baby. The group grew larger as they climbed higher. More refugees joined them each day. Families with children, elderly people who could barely walk, young men trying to avoid conscription. They formed a long, struggling line moving slowly through the mountains. On the 5th day, they saw their first German patrol. Everyone dropped to the ground behind rocks and trees, hearts pounding. The soldiers were maybe 100 yards away, following a different path down the mountain. Elena pressed her hand gently over Maria's mouth, praying the baby wouldn't cry. They waited for what felt like hours before the patrol passed. When they finally stood up, Elena's legs were shaking. This was real. They were being hunted. The nights were getting colder as they climbed higher. Elena had given Maria her own sweater, and she shivered constantly, but she couldn't let her daughter get sick. Nothing else mattered except keeping Maria alive and safe. On the 7th day, they reached the high meadows. The grass was brown and dry, and snow dusted the peaks around them. Elena could see her breath in the morning air. They were getting close to the border, but the hardest part was still ahead. That night, huddled around a small fire, Marco told them what he knew about the crossing. "We have to go over the ridge tomorrow. It's steep and dangerous, but it's the only way to avoid the main checkpoints. Once we're over, we should be able to see the Swiss Valley." Elena looked at the mountain ridge towering above them. It looked impossible, especially with a baby. But she had come this far. She had to believe they could make it. As she settled Maria for the night, Elena whispered to her daughter about the life they would build on the other side. About safety and peace, and a future where children could play without fear. She didn't know if Giuseppe would ever find them, but she had to believe that somewhere, somehow, they would be together again. The fire died down, and the refugees settled into an uneasy sleep. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. But they had survived this long. They would find a way to survive whatever came next. Elena held her baby close and watched the stars appear one by one in the mountain sky. Each star was like a small light of hope in the darkness. And hope, she realized, was all they really had left. The mountain ridge looked impossible in the early morning light. Elena stood with the other refugees, staring up at the steep rock face that separated them from Switzerland. Her arms ached from carrying Maria for 8 days, and her feet were raw inside her worn shoes, but this was their only chance. "Stay close together," Marco whispered to the group. "If anyone falls behind, we all stop. No one gets left behind." Elena adjusted the shawl that held Maria to her chest. The baby had been unusually quiet all morning, and Elena worried she might be getting sick. There was no medicine, no doctor, nothing she could do except keep her daughter warm and pray. The climb took 4 hours. Elena's lungs burned in the thin mountain air, and several times she had to stop to catch her breath. The Benedetti twins were crying from exhaustion, and Rosa's elderly mother needed help with every step. But somehow they all kept moving. When they finally reached the top of the ridge, Elena felt her heart skip. Below them lay a green valley dotted with small villages and farms. Switzerland. It looked peaceful and safe, like a place where children could play without fear, but getting down the other side proved even harder than climbing up. The path was narrow and rocky, with steep drops on both sides. Elena held Maria with one arm and used the other to steady herself against the rock wall. One wrong step would mean death for both of them. They reached the bottom just as the sun was setting. Everyone was exhausted, but they had made it. They were in Switzerland. Elena kissed Maria's forehead and whispered, "We're safe now, little one. We're finally safe." But safety, Elena soon learned, was more complicated than she had imagined. The Swiss border guards found them the next morning. Elena woke to the sound of boots on gravel and men speaking in German. For a moment, panic shot through her. Had they been caught? Were they being sent back? "Don't be afraid," said one of the guards in broken Italian. "You are in Switzerland now. We will take you to the processing center." The processing center was a large building in the town of Chiasso, near the Italian border. Elena had never seen so many people in one place. Hundreds of refugees sat on wooden benches, waiting to be interviewed. There were families from Italy, like her own, but also people from France, Austria, and countries she had never heard of. Elena held Maria close as they waited. The baby was fussy and wouldn't stop crying. Other mothers in the crowd looked at her with sympathy. They all understood what it was like to try to care for a child with nothing. When Elena's turn came, she sat across from a tired-looking Swiss official who spoke through an interpreter. The questions seemed to go on forever. What was her name? Where was she from? Why had she left Italy? Did she have any family in Switzerland, any money, any skills? Elena answered as best she could, but she felt like she was shrinking with each question. She was nobody special. Just a village woman with a baby and no husband. What could she possibly offer this new country? The official stamped some papers and handed them to her. "You will be sent to a refugee settlement in the mountains above Lake Geneva," the interpreter explained. "You will be given food and shelter. In return, you will work as assigned." Elena nodded, not really understanding what this meant. She was just grateful to be alive and safe. The journey to the refugee settlement took 2 days by train and bus. Elena had never been on a train before, and the speed made her dizzy. Maria seemed to enjoy the rocking motion and slept most of the way. When they finally arrived, Elena's heart sank. The settlement was a collection of long wooden buildings surrounded by a high fence. It looked more like a prison than a place to live. The buildings were painted gray and had small windows with bars on them. "This is your new home," said the camp administrator, a stern Swiss woman who spoke perfect Italian. "You will be in building C, bed number 47. Meals are at 7, 12, and 6. Work assignments begin tomorrow." Building C was a long dormitory with rows of narrow beds. Elena's bed was just a thin mattress on a metal frame with a single gray blanket. The woman in the next bed was from France and spoke no Italian. On the other side was an elderly Austrian woman who cried quietly at night. Elena lay on her narrow bed that first night, holding Maria close. Through the small window, she could see the lights of a Swiss village in the distance. The people there were going about their normal lives, eating dinner with their families, tucking their children into warm beds. She wondered if she would ever have a normal life again. The days in the settlement fell into a routine. Elena woke at dawn when Maria started crying. She would feed the baby, then go to breakfast in the main hall. The food was simple but filling. Bread, soup, sometimes a little cheese or meat after breakfast. Elena reported to the laundry building where she washed clothes and bedding for the entire camp. The work was hard and her hands became red and raw from the soap and hot water. But it felt good to be useful, to contribute something. In the afternoons, she helped care for the children whose mothers were working in other parts of the camp. There were so many children who had lost their fathers to the war. Elena's heart broke for them, but she also found joy in making them laugh and feel safe. Evenings were the hardest time. After dinner, the refugees would gather in small groups, talking quietly about the homes they had left behind. Some people had news from relatives who had made it to other countries. Others had received letters from family members still trapped in the war. Elena had no letters. She didn't even know if Giuseppe was alive. Sometimes she would stand at the fence that surrounded the camp, looking south toward the mountains that separated her from Italy. She would imagine him walking along the roads, looking for her and Maria. But as the weeks passed, hope became harder to hold on to. The other refugees became like family to her. There was Rosa, who had escaped with her mother from the same village. There was a woman named Lucia from Rome who had lost her husband and 2 sons. There was a young man named Pietro who had deserted from the army rather than fight for the Germans. They shared their stories in whispers after the lights went out. They shared their food when someone was sick. They took turns watching each other's children. They cried together when bad news came from home. Elena learned that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant finding ways to stay human, in a place that could easily make you feel like just another number. She learned to find small joys. Maria's first smile. A letter from the Red Cross that at least confirmed Giuseppe had been alive 6 months ago. A warm, sunny day when she could sit outside and feel the sun on her face. The Swiss officials told them that the war would end soon. They said that refugees would be able to return to their home countries when it was safe. But Elena wondered what they would return to. Would their village still be there? Would the olive groves her family had tended for generations still be standing? As winter approached, Elena realized that she had become someone different from the woman who had fled her village months ago. She was stronger now, more independent. She had learned to make decisions and take care of herself and her daughter without depending on anyone else, but she had also learned that home was not just a place. It was the people you loved, the connections you made, the community you built around yourself. And somehow, even in this camp surrounded by fences, she had found a new kind of home among these other displaced souls who understood what it meant to lose everything and still keep going. When she held Maria at night, Elena would tell her stories about the life they would build when the war was over. She didn't know where that life would be, but she knew they would find a way to be happy again. They had to. Hope was all they had left, and Elena was determined not to let it go. Elena first noticed the tall American on a cold Tuesday morning in November. She was hanging wet laundry on the line behind Building C when she saw him walking through the camp with the Swiss administrator. He was different from the other officials who visited the settlement. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who spent time outdoors, and he stopped to talk with the refugees instead of walking past them. "Who is that man?" Elena asked Rosa, who was hanging sheets next to her. "I heard he's some kind of scout." Rosa replied, "Works for the Swiss government, checking on the border camps. He's American, I think. Been living in the mountains for years." Elena watched as the man knelt down to speak with one of the Benedetti twins, who had been sick with fever for 3 days. The boy was too weak to play with the other children, but somehow the stranger made him laugh. Elena found herself curious about someone who could bring joy to a place that had so little of it. Later that afternoon, Elena was in the children's area when she heard crying from the corner. Little Anna, whose mother worked in the kitchens, was huddled against the wall, her face red with fever. Elena touched the child's forehead and felt the burning heat of illness. "We need to get her to the medical station," Elena said to the other women, but they shook their heads. "The nurse left yesterday," one of them explained. "There's no medicine anyway. We just have to wait and hope the fever breaks." Elena couldn't accept that. She picked up Anna and started walking toward the camp office, determined to find someone who could help. The little girl was burning up, and Elena remembered too well what it felt like to watch a child suffer with no way to help. She was halfway across the courtyard when she met the American man coming the other way. Up close, she could see he had kind eyes and hands that were rough from outdoor work. He looked at the sick child in her arms and immediately understood the problem. "How long has she been like this?" he asked in careful Italian. "Since this morning," Elena replied. "Maybe longer. Her mother is working and doesn't know how bad it is." Without hesitation, the man reached into his pack and pulled out a small bottle. "This will help bring down the fever," he said, measuring out a small amount of liquid. "Give her this now, and more in 4 hours if she doesn't improve." Elena stared at him in surprise. "You carry medicine?" "I learned a long time ago that it's better to be prepared," he said simply. "My name is Thomas. By the way, Thomas Brennan." "Elena," she replied, then added, "Thank you. This means everything." Thomas stayed while Elena gave the medicine to Anna. The child's fever broke within an hour, and she was able to drink some water. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been able to help, and it was because of this stranger's kindness. Over the next few days, Elena found herself looking for Thomas whenever he visited the camp. He seemed to have a gift for appearing when people needed help most. When old Pietro's cough got worse, Thomas brought herbs that helped him breathe easier. When the Benedetti family ran out of warm clothes for the twins, Thomas somehow found child-sized sweaters. Elena began to realize that Thomas was doing more than just checking on the camp. He was quietly helping people in ways that went far beyond his official duties. She wondered why an American would care so much about a group of displaced Italians. She got her answer one evening when she found Thomas sitting alone outside the camp office, staring up at the mountains. Maria was sleeping peacefully in Elena's arms, and she decided to approach him. "You don't have to sit alone," she said softly. "Even Americans need company sometimes." Thomas smiled. "I was just thinking about home," he said. "Montana. The mountains there remind me of these, but they're bigger, wilder. More space between the peaks." Elena sat down beside him. "Why did you leave Montana to come here?" "I came to Europe to learn about mountain climbing and surveying," Thomas explained. "That was before the war started. When everything went crazy, I couldn't get back home. The Swiss government needed someone who knew the mountains, so I started working for them." "But you do more than just work," Elena observed. "You help people." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather came to America from Ireland during the potato famine," he said finally. "He used to tell me stories about the crossing, about how hard it was to start over in a new place. I guess I understand what it feels like to need help when you're far from home." Elena felt something stir in her chest. Here was someone who understood displacement, who knew what it meant to be a stranger in a strange land. She found herself telling him about her village, about Giuseppe, about the fears that kept her awake at night. "You're afraid he's dead?" Thomas said gently. It wasn't a question. "I'm afraid of hoping," Elena admitted. "Hope hurts too much when it's taken away." Thomas nodded. "I understand. But sometimes hope is the only thing that keeps us moving forward." From that night on, Elena looked forward to Thomas's visits. He would arrive every few days, officially checking on camp conditions, but really making sure people were okay. He would bring small gifts, a piece of chocolate for the children, a book for someone who could read, warm socks for the elderly. Elena began to help him with his rounds. She knew which families needed the most help, which children were getting sick, which elderly people were losing hope. Together, they created a quiet network of care that made life in the camp a little more bearable. Thomas told her stories about Montana, about wide-open spaces and communities where neighbors helped each other without being asked. Elena found herself imagining what it would be like to live in such a place, where Maria could grow up free and safe. "What will you do when the war ends?" Elena asked him one day as they watched the children play in the courtyard. "I don't know," Thomas said honestly. "I've been thinking about going back to Montana, maybe starting a business helping people explore the mountains. But I've also been thinking about staying in Europe, helping with the reconstruction." Elena felt a strange disappointment at the thought of him leaving. Over the months, Thomas had become more than just a helpful official. He had become a friend, someone she could talk to about her fears and hopes. "What about you?" Thomas asked. "Will you go back to Italy?" Elena looked down at Maria, who was starting to crawl and explore the world around her. "I don't know if there's anything left to go back to," she said. "My village might be gone. Giuseppe might be ... quotes. She couldn't finish the sentence. "Maybe," Thomas said quietly. "Sometimes we have to build something new instead of trying to rebuild what was lost." Elena thought about his words long after he left that day. She had been so focused on returning to her old life that she hadn't considered the possibility of creating a new one. But what if Thomas was right? What if the future held something different, something better than what she had lost? As winter deepened, Elena found herself depending more and more on Thomas's visits. Not just for the supplies he brought, but for the hope he carried with him. He saw possibilities where others saw only problems. He believed in tomorrow when others could only think about yesterday. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Thomas said something that would change everything. "There's a program," he said carefully, "for refugees who want to start over in America. It's not easy and it takes time, but it's possible. I've been thinking, if you're interested, I could help you with the application." Elena's heart stopped. America, the land of opportunity that seemed as distant as the moon? Could she really leave Europe behind completely? Could she take Maria so far from everything familiar? But as she looked at Thomas's honest face, she realized that perhaps familiar wasn't what she needed anymore. Perhaps what she needed was hope, possibility, and someone who believed in her ability to build a new life. "Tell me more," she said. Quietly, and for the first time in months, Elena felt something that had been missing for too long. She felt excited about the future. Winter hit the refugee camp harder than anyone had expected. The wooden buildings that had seemed sturdy in autumn now felt like paper against the fierce mountain winds. Elena woke each morning to find frost on the inside of the windows, and her breath formed clouds even under the thin blankets. The camp's heating system broke down in December, and the Swiss officials said it would take weeks to get parts for repairs. Elena watched helplessly as the elderly residents grew weaker each day. Rosa's mother developed a terrible cough that kept her awake at night. The Benedetti twins shivered constantly, their lips turning blue despite the extra clothes Elena had. Found for them, food became scarcer too. The supply trucks that usually came twice a week were delayed by snowstorms. Meals shrank to thin soup and hard bread. Elena gave most of her portions to Maria, who was now crawling everywhere and needed nutrition to grow. But Elena herself grew thinner, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. It was during the worst week of winter that Elena discovered Thomas's secret. She couldn't sleep because Maria was fussy and cold. So she wrapped the baby in every piece of clothing she could find and walked to the window. The camp was dark except for the guard station near the gate. But as Elena watched, she saw a figure moving between the buildings, carrying what looked like a large bag. Elena's heart raced. Was it a thief? Someone trying to steal their meager supplies? She watched more carefully and realized the figure was actually leaving things, not taking them. Small packages were being placed quietly beside the doors of the buildings that housed the sickest residents. The next morning, Elena found a package outside Building C. Inside were warm blankets, canned soup, and medicine for coughs and fever. Other buildings had received similar gifts. The camp buzzed with excitement and confusion. Who was their mysterious benefactor? Elena had her suspicions, but she kept them to herself. When Thomas arrived for his regular visit 2 days later, she watched him carefully. He acted normally, checking on the camp conditions and talking with the refugees. But Elena noticed how he avoided looking directly at the buildings where the packages had appeared. That evening, Elena couldn't stand the curiosity anymore. She bundled Maria up and waited outside until she saw Thomas preparing to leave. Then she followed him at a distance. Staying in the shadows between buildings, she watched as Thomas walked to a storage area behind the camp office and retrieved a large pack. Then he began making his rounds, quietly leaving packages at the doors of families who needed help most. Elena saw him place medicine outside the door where an elderly man was dying of pneumonia. She watched him leave warm clothes for a family whose father had frostbite. Elena felt tears freezing on her cheeks. Thomas was risking his job, maybe even his freedom, to help them. If the Swiss officials discovered what he was doing, he could be arrested for theft or corruption. When Thomas finished his secret deliveries, Elena stepped out of the shadows. "You're going to get yourself in trouble," she said softly. Thomas spun around, startled. When he saw Elena standing there with Maria in her arms, his shoulders sagged. "How long have you been watching?" "Long enough," Elena replied. "Where are you getting these supplies?" Thomas looked around nervously, then gestured for her to follow him to a quieter spot away from the buildings. "I buy them in the village," he admitted. "Sometimes I trade my own rations. Sometimes I use my salary. I know it's not much, but people are suffering." Elena stared at him. "You're spending your own money to help us?" "It's not about money," Thomas said. "It's about doing what's right. I've seen too many people die from cold and hunger when it could have been prevented." Elena felt something break open inside her chest. Here was a man who had no obligation to help them, who gained nothing from his kindness except the satisfaction of knowing he had eased someone's suffering. She thought about Giuseppe, who had been conscripted and forced to fight. She thought about the German soldiers who had destroyed their village. And then she thought about Thomas, who chose to help strangers simply because they needed help. "Ah. Want to help you?" Elena said suddenly. Thomas looked surprised. "Elena, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she insisted. "I know these people better than you do. I know who needs help most urgently. I know how to distribute supplies without drawing attention. Let me help you help them." From that night on, Elena became Thomas's partner in their secret mission of mercy. She would identify the families most in need, and Thomas would find ways to get supplies to them. Elena learned to move through the camp like a ghost, delivering packages and medicine without being seen. Working together brought them closer than Elena had expected. She began to understand Thomas in ways that went beyond their conversations. She saw how he never took credit for his kindness, how he worried about every person in the camp, how he pushed himself to exhaustion to help others. One night, as they finished distributing warm socks to the children's building, Thomas told Elena about his childhood in Montana. "My family didn't have much money," he said as they walked back through the snow. "We lived on a ranch, but it was hard work just to survive. I remember winters when we ran out of food, when my mother had to choose between heating the house and buying medicine for my sick brother." Elena listened, understanding for the first time why Thomas felt so strongly about helping refugees. "What happened to your brother?" "He died when he was 7, Thomas said quietly. "Pneumonia. If we had been able to afford better medicine, better heating, maybe he would have lived." Elena stopped walking. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "It was a long time ago," Thomas replied. "But I learned something from watching my mother make those impossible choices. I learned that sometimes one person's kindness can mean the difference between life and death." Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the cold winter air. She was falling in love with this man, she realized. Not just because he was kind, but because he understood what it meant to struggle, to worry, to make sacrifices for the people you cared about. But love felt dangerous. Elena had learned not to trust happiness, not to expect good things to last. What if Thomas left when the war ended? What if he decided helping refugees was too much trouble? What if she opened her heart only to have it broken again? As if reading her thoughts, Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. "Elena," he said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you." Elena's heart clenched. Here it was. The moment when he would tell her he was leaving, that their partnership was temporary, that she had been foolish to imagine anything more. "I've been offered a position with an American relief organization," Thomas continued. "They want me to help resettle refugees in the United States. It would mean traveling to America, helping people start new lives there." Elena felt the world shift around her. "That's wonderful," she managed to say. "You'll be able to help so many more people." "I haven't accepted yet," Thomas said. "I wanted to talk to you first." Elena looked at him in confusion. "Why would you need to talk to me?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Because I was hoping you might consider coming with me. I'm not asking you to." He struggled with the words. "I'm asking if you would consider applying for resettlement. I could help you with the paperwork, make sure you and Maria have everything you need." Elena stared at him. America, the land of opportunity, a place where Maria could grow up free and safe. But it also meant leaving Europe forever, abandoning any hope of finding Giuseppe, giving up everything familiar. "I don't know," she whispered. "You don't have to decide now," Thomas said quickly. "Just think about it. Think about what would be best for Maria, for your future." As they walked back to the camp in silence, Elena's mind raced. She thought about the life she had lost in Italy, the husband who might never return, the village that might no longer exist. Then she thought about the life Thomas was offering, full of uncertainty but also full of possibility. For the first time since the war began, Elena faced a choice that was entirely her own. Not a choice forced on her by circumstances, but a real decision about what kind of future she wanted to build. The weight of that choice felt heavier than anything she had carried during their escape from Italy. But it also felt like the first step toward hope. Elena couldn't sleep for 3 weeks after Thomas made his offer. She would lie awake at night, holding Maria close, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears. America felt like a dream that might disappear if she reached for it. But staying in Europe meant accepting that her old life was truly gone forever. During the day, she watched Thomas work with the other refugees, seeing how naturally he helped people solve their problems. He never seemed to doubt that things would work out, that people deserved better lives. Elena envied his certainty. She had been living with doubt for so long that hope felt like a foreign language. The decision became even harder when spring arrived. The snow melted, and the camp didn't feel quite so much like a prison. Elena could take Maria outside to play in the sunshine. The baby was walking now, taking wobbly steps and laughing at everything. Elena tried to imagine her daughter growing up in this place, speaking German and Italian but never knowing her homeland. Then, on a warm April morning, everything changed. Elena was hanging laundry when Rosa came running across the courtyard, waving a piece of paper. "The Red Cross truck is here," she shouted. "They have mail, letters from home." Elena's heart stopped. She had been waiting for news about Giuseppe for almost a year. Every time the Red Cross came, she hoped for a letter, a telegram, anything that would tell her what had happened to her husband. She followed Rosa to the camp office, where a crowd had gathered around a Red Cross worker with a box of letters. Elena waited, her hands shaking as names were called out. Some people cried with joy when they got letters. Others walked away disappointed. "Elena Marchetti," the worker called out. Elena's legs felt weak as she walked forward to take the envelope. Her name was written in neat handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside was a letter from a Red Cross office in Naples, dated 2 weeks earlier. She read it twice before the words made sense. Giuseppe had been killed in action near Monte Cassino 6 months ago. He had died fighting the Germans, trying to help other soldiers who were trapped. The letter said he had been brave, that he had saved 3 men before he died. Elena sat down hard on a wooden bench outside the office. Maria was playing at her feet, chasing a butterfly, completely unaware that her father was never coming home. Elena felt empty, as if something had been torn out of her chest. She had known, somewhere deep inside, that Giuseppe was probably dead. But knowing and having it confirmed were different things. Now there was no hope left to hold on to, no reason to dream about returning to their old life. Thomas found her there an hour later, still sitting on the bench, staring at the letter. He didn't say anything, just sat down beside her. Elena handed him the letter, and he read it carefully. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Elena wiped her eyes. "I keep thinking about the last time I saw him. He was so excited about the baby, about being a father. He made me promise to take care of Maria if anything happened to him." "You've kept that promise," Thomas said. "You've done everything possible to keep her safe." Elena looked at Maria, who was now trying to catch dandelion seeds floating in the air. "What kind of life can I give her here? In this camp, surrounded by fences, with no future except waiting for someone else to decide what happens to us?" Thomas didn't answer immediately. He was learning to give Elena space to think, to work through her feelings without pressure. "Tell me about America," Elena said suddenly. "Tell me what it would really be like." Thomas smiled. "It's big," he said. "Bigger than you can imagine. In Montana, you can drive for hours without seeing another person. The sky goes on forever, and the mountains make these ones look like hills." Elena tried to picture it. "Would Maria be able to go to school?" "Of course. All children go to school in America. She would learn English, make friends, maybe even go to college someday if she wanted to. And the people, would they accept us?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "It won't be easy," he said honestly. "Some people might not understand why you came, but there are others who will help you, who will welcome you." "My family would welcome you?" Elena felt something shift inside her. "Your family?" "My parents still live on the ranch where I grew up. My sister and her husband live nearby. They're good people, Elena. They would help you and Maria get settled. Find work, learn the language." Elena closed her eyes and imagined it. A real house, not a camp bed. A job where she could earn money and take care of her daughter. A place where Maria could run and play without fences, What would I do for work? She asked. There are always jobs for people who aren't afraid to work hard, Thomas said. Cooking, cleaning, taking care of children. Or maybe you could learn something new. In America, people can change their lives if they're willing to try. Elena thought about the woman she had become during the war. She had learned to be strong, to make difficult decisions, to survive things she never thought she could face. Maybe she could learn to build a new life too. If I said yes, she said carefully, what would happen between us? Thomas looked at her with those honest eyes she had come to trust. I don't know, he said. I know I care about you and Maria. I know I want to help you have a better life. But I also know you've been through too much to make decisions about love right now. Elena appreciated his honesty. She wasn't ready for romance, but she was ready for partnership, for friendship, for the possibility of something more if it developed. Naturally, I want to try, she said suddenly. I want to apply for resettlement. Thomas's face lit up. Are you sure? Elena looked at Maria, who had found a stick and was drawing pictures in the dirt. I'm sure that I want my daughter to have choices. I want her to grow up believing that anything is possible. The application process took months. Elena had to fill out forms, be interviewed by officials, take medical exams. Thomas helped her with everything, translating when necessary, explaining what each step meant. Finally, in September, Elena received the news. She and Maria had been approved for resettlement in the United States. They would sail from Le Havre to New York in October. The night before they left the camp, Elena walked around the buildings one last time. She said goodbye to Rosa, who was waiting to hear about her own application. She hugged the Benedetti twins, who were staying with relatives in Switzerland. She thanked the camp administrator, who had become almost like a friend. You're brave, Rosa told her. I don't know if I could leave everything behind and start over so far away. I'm not brave, Elena replied. I'm just tired of being afraid. The journey to America took 2 weeks. Elena stood on the deck of the ship as it entered New York Harbor, holding Maria in her arms. The Statue of Liberty rose from the water like a promise, like a greeting from their new home. Thomas was waiting for them at Ellis Island. He had arrived a month earlier to prepare for their arrival. Elena felt nervous and excited and terrified all at once. Welcome to America, he said, smiling. Elena looked around at the crowds of people, the busy officials, the organized chaos of immigration. It's so big, she said. You'll get used to it, Thomas promised. And if you don't like it, if you want to go back to Europe, I'll help you do that too. Elena knew she wouldn't want to go back. She had learned that home wasn't a place you returned to, but something you created. And she was ready to create something new. The train ride to Montana took 3 days. Elena watched the American landscape roll past the windows, amazed by the endless space, the vast sky, the sense of possibility that seemed to stretch to the horizon. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Thomas's family was waiting. His mother took Maria immediately, cooing over her in English that Elena couldn't understand but that sounded warm and welcoming. His father shook Elena's hand and said something that made Thomas laugh. He says you're prettier than I described. Thomas translated, and Elena felt herself blush. That first winter in Montana was hard. Elena had to learn English, learn American customs, learn to live in a place where the nearest neighbor was miles away. But she also learned that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She and Thomas were married the following spring, in a small ceremony in the local church. Elena wore a simple white dress that Thomas's sister had made for her. Maria, now, walking and talking, scattered flower petals down the aisle as Elena stood beside Thomas. Promising to build a life together, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The war had taken everything from her, but it had also led her to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. When Maria took her first steps across the wide Montana plains, Elena realized that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just safety, but the courage to believe in tomorrow. Not just survival, but the possibility of joy. The war had ended, but Elena's real life was just beginning.